Our last approximate matching example is going to, instead of using grades, we're going to use FICO scores and interest rates. So in this example, the structure of our buckets of how we're going to score people and put them into different interest rates has changed. If you recall from the last example, right, if we flip back, grades were determined based on greater than or equal to some threshold. So a 90% or greater got you an A. In our example with interest rates, your FICO scores only get you credit ratings if you exceed the threshold. So for example, in this case, if your FICO score is bigger than 800 and less than or equal to 850, you get a 4% rate. If it's bigger than 720 or less than or equal to 800, now we get 5%, and so on. And importantly, the equality is at the top of the bucket rather than at the bottom of the bucket, right? Before a 90%, you actually went to the higher bucket. Now we're saying if you're 800, you go to the lower bucket. And because of that distinction, now we're going to flip to descending matching. That's going to be the key, is if the buckets are structured that it's greater than or equal to, and you go up, that's ascending matching. Greater than or less is going to be, equal to or less is going to be the descending matching. So that's why we're setting up our table in a descending fashion here with our lookup scores the same way we did in the previous example. Now let me delete what we have in here and show you how this works with our index match and with our XLOOKUP. So with our index match, we're going to set up our array that we're getting back as our interest rate. Our match is based on whatever FICO score we have. And now we're going to match it in this lookup score. And we'll walk through exactly how this works in a second. But now we're going to do our -1 for greater than matching. So we've closed that out. And let's check our first example here. So we see a credit score of 733 and 5%. So if we come up here, it's not greater than 800. It is between 720 and 800. 5%, it's giving us the right answer. Now where you have to pay a lot of attention is when you get to things like down here in this 720. You always want to check examples where you're at that break point. So in this case, 720 is associated with 6%. Let's check if that's correct. So we see 720. If it's greater than 720, you should have 5%. But if it's less than or equal to 720, so if it's 720, you should get 6%. So in this case, we're getting the correct answer, and it's because we set up our lookup table in a descending fashion. If we would have flipped this and made it ascending, at that point, 720 is going to get assigned to the next higher bucket and get a 5% rate, which would not be correct. So it's really important that if we're basically setting up our thresholds as the top of the bucket, now we're going to use descending matching. Now, if we flip over to XLOOKUP, we can do the same exercise where we select our different arguments. Again, we're going to skip that if not found. And now for our match model, we're going to use the greater than, or exact match, or next larger than, which is going to be a 1, to close that off. And it is worth pointing out, so we do get the same answers, and this is going to give us the correct answers. And it's worth pointing out that we have to use the opposite 1 versus -1 with index match versus XLOOKUP, right? If we look at our index match function, you see we have a -1 up there in our last argument. That -1 is for descending matching. The way Excel has structured it now, with the XLOOKUP, is that the 1 now means greater than, or exact match, or the next larger. So again, it works with descending data. You don't have to sort it for XLOOKUP to work, but it's still helpful to build your lookup tables in a sorted structure. That way, users that look at it can actually understand how you're thinking about the data and where those breakpoints are coming along. Again, though, you're going to use a 1 with XLOOKUP with descending data, whereas you're going to use the -1 with index match. The last thing to point out is we don't have a VLOOKUP column here. Again, because VLOOKUP can't deal with descending data. So if it's a descending structure like this, you're going to have to use either index match or XLOOKUP.